Hi everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'm Molly. I'm part of the team at Greenheart. Whilst we're just waiting for everyone to join and trickle in, please do introduce yourself in the chat so we can see who's here today. Let us know where you're from and who you work with. Um, the session will be recorded today and we will share the recording after the session. Please use the chat box loads, share your thoughts, add comments as we go through. We love to see lots of engagement in there. There will be time for Q&A at the end. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you put a question in the chat, we might miss it. If there's a question that you want answered, you can upvote them, and that's really helpful because we know to prioritize it at the end. Great to see everyone starting to trickle in. I'm going to hand over to Tom to get the session started because we have a packed agenda today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Molly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. You're extremely welcome indeed to the latest Greenheart webinar on the new standards. If you don't know me, I'm Tom, founder and chief ecosystem officer here at Greenheart, and I'm delighted to be joined by my superstar colleagues, Daisy and Lucy, who are at the absolute forefront of B Corp advisory work and are here to share their knowledge today. And we're also joined by some fantastic guests who I will introduce in a bit. If you don't already know us, we are a full service social and environmental impact consultancy working with ambitious companies like you all to unlock resilience by building sustainability into their strategies. We've been a certified B Corp now since 2017, and we've helped over that time many dozens of companies on their certification journeys. So some of you will have been to our previous webinars on the new standards, which have very much focused on helping companies understand what is changing. This session is a little bit different. It was originally conceived as a "don't panic, the new standards aren't all that bad" session. We decided on a less dramatic title, but the intention is very much the same. We're here to give you confidence in the road ahead if you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And I have to say, it is a record-breaking number of registrations this afternoon for a Greenheart webinar, so I suspect we've hit a nerve. If you've missed the previous webinars, don't worry. We will do a quick recap before we kick off in earnest, but they're all available to rewatch on our YouTube channel. So with that in mind, here is what we have got lined up for you today. We are going to be firstly just taking the pulse, seeing how you are feeling about this the topic that we're speaking about. Then I'll hand over to Lucy and Daisy to give you the recap on what's changing and why we are feeling more confident and people we're speaking to are feeling more confident. Then we will introduce our guests and hear some voices from people who are already doing this and feeling good about the new standards, so that you're not just hearing from us. And then we will have a good old Q&A with both the Greenheart experts and our guests. So hopefully that will be a very useful agenda. So to get started, it is very possible, I suspect, that you are here because, like us, you've been through some or all of these emotions since the new standards were first announced, whenever it was, years ago now. The aim today is very much to help you navigate from wherever you are now into this happy space. But I'm curious, where are you right now? Where are you? How are your feelings sitting? Load up the chat with your emojis, or if you can't find the right emoji, just give us a word, whatever. Good mix so far. Good mix so far. Good. Fear, rage, denial, and frustration. Yeah, totally hear you. Good. Well, let's we'll do another little poll a little bit later on to see if some of the fear and confusion have been cleared. That's what we're hoping for anyway. So if I may, I'm going to pass over to Lucy to get us started on the recap.
Thank you, Tom. So yes, the new B Corp standards are a complete overhaul, and there's been a lot of information released over the past few months. But the good news is that all of this information builds on itself, and that means also that we have now more clarity than ever on the process, the type of evidence that's needed, what companies can expect, etc. So we've taken the time to digest it all from the detailed requirements to the new certification process, and we want to give you a clear summary of what's changing, but we'll also highlight a few key points that will hopefully make the journey a little bit less daunting than it did the day you realized that the new standards were something like 1,000 and more page PDF. So next slide, Tom, please. Um, just summarizing basically, hopefully some of this is familiar, and we're not going to deep dive into the granular details of the new standards today because that's the whole topic on its own. And actually, I think one of my colleagues can probably post into the chat the webinar that we did on this topic earlier this year. But just as a reminder of the headlines to make sure that we're all on the same page, these are the headlines of the changes in the new standards. So first, instead of a flexible point-based system, the new standards introduce mandatory requirements, which include foundation requirements that are essentially eligibility criteria and then performance requirements across 7 impact topics from purpose and stakeholder governance to climate action and human rights. Second, with the points-based approach gone, the score goes as well, and the focus is now firmly on raising the floor, as B Lab describes it, and ensuring that all B Corps meet a minimum level of high social and environmental performance. Third news is that the impact business models that were a very much loved feature of B Corp are not part of the new standards. And the focus is, as mentioned, really on minimum operational performance for all B Corps. IBM's brought some challenges in their verification, measurement, and it would have been really difficult to resolve this in time without delaying further the new standards. So B Lab has not included them in the new standards, but has acknowledged that they're still key to their theory of change and will conduct further consultation on the topic in future. Fourth change worth noticing is that continuous improvements that were always a key value and a core part of the B Corp movement are now formally built into the standards with requirements phased across year 0, year 3, and year 5 requirements. So companies are expected not only to meet those minimum requirements as certification, but then to maintain and continuously improve and strengthen their performance over time. Fifth, another key change is that certification will now be delivered through third-party assurance. So B Lab will still be involved at the beginning and at the end of the process, but the auditing itself will be carried out by an independent B Lab approved third party. And they have already announced which 2 key providers will be doing this. And this shift is important because it aligns with industry best practice and also helps meet EU regulation and expectation for certification labels. And finally, quick but useful point on terminology. The new standards, which we used to refer as version 7, are now part of a new naming system. So the current, or rather the previous standards that are still in effect for a few more months, that were in their 6th version since their inception, and they're now called version 1.6. And the new standards are version 2, so really emphasizing how much of an overall and a radical change they are. And we are currently in version 2.1 of those new standards, reflecting that there has been minor updates to the standards in August of this year compared to the version that was released in April. So this is just a little technicality in case you ever get confused with those numbers. New standards are, version 2, and we're in version 2.1 currently. So hopefully all of this was already familiar. But there also has been a few important announcements over the past few months, including some updates, more details around the certification process. So over the next few slides, I'll just hand over to Daisy to bring you up to speed on those elements.
Thanks, Lucy. We could go to the next slide, please, Tom. Thank you. So yeah, over the last few weeks, B Lab have released a lot of new information, which
to be honest, I've been struggling to keep up with, but it is very, very welcome to see all of this information being released and put into the public sphere. So the next few slides are aiming to summarize that for you so that you have a really good overview and snapshot of all of this new guidance, what it means for you, and also to know where to go and get it. And we'll also be sending out some links after this webinar so that you can access all of this new guidance really easily and have it at your fingertips whilst you're working through the process. So the most welcome news from my side is that we now have a really clear overview of what the new audit process is going to look like. And this is something that has kind of been looming in the background, and we haven't had any clarity on this for the whole time that we've been working on understanding the new standards, understanding the foundation requirements, understanding the performance requirements. Now we actually know how they're going to be assessing everyone's performance against this. So this is like a brief high-level overview of that process. So just quickly going through this, basically the initial steps will be registering on the B Impact platform, which hopefully lots of you have already done by using the self-assessment tool to start looking at the new standards that are applicable to your business. And that's also where your eligibility and your performance against the foundation requirements will be checked. So if you're already an existing B Corp, lots of these will already be met because it's things like the legal requirement and your company being a limited company or an eligible company form, which B Lab will have already checked in your previous certification processes, but these checks will all now be embedded in the B Impact platform, which is a welcome change. And also within the B Impact platform, your scope will be confirmed. So this will be the entities that are included in your assessment and also your track, so your sector and your size category, which we'll come on to a bit later. So once you're registered on B Impact and you can see all of your requirements that you need to meet, then the task is really in completing the self-assessment, meeting those performance requirements, doing the necessary impact improvements in order to be able to build the evidence and the documentation to show that you're meeting those. And then, of course, that little bullet point is actually quite a long journey. But once you're at the point of submitting, then this is where we now really have the clarity of what it's going to look like after you've submitted through the audit process and how you're going to be checked, basically, and assessed against these new standards. So there's two assurance providers, as Lucy mentioned, they're third-party assurance providers who will be checking compliance against the new standards. So for small-sized companies and below, it will be an assurance provider called 2Cert, and then for medium-sized companies and above, it will be SCS Global, which is quite a well-known audit provider. Then in terms of the audit process, you'll receive a lot of information directly from your assurance provider, depending on your size category, including an audit schedule, which will be exactly what is going to be involved in your audit, and that will be determined by your company size. So for example, the exact number of days that you can expect to be engaging with the assurance provider, which can be up to 15 days. And then you will receive your audit report, which is basically the report that the assurance provider will give you after they've assessed all of your self-assessment and your documentation that has been uploaded to the B Impact platform. That's where the audit provider will highlight non-conformities that have been identified, and we've got a slide about that a bit later. And once they're happy that you're meeting the requirements, you will receive your 5-year certification certificate. Of course, that comes with the condition that you comply with the continuous improvement requirements. So basically checking that you're meeting the requirements when you get to year 3 and year 5 via the audit process that's applicable to your size of company. So for example, if you're a large company, you might have to do a surveillance audit, which is where you'll need to show that you're meeting the requirements still. For example, in year 2, you can still show that you're meeting the year 0 requirements. In year 3, you'll be meeting the year 3 requirements, etc. So there's a lot of details about this audit schedule and what you can expect for your size and sector of company in the documentation that B Lab has recently released. So if we go on to the next slide, this is where we're going to talk about all of these new releases of information, and we will send the links out to all of these after the webinar. So as Lucy mentioned, the new standards, the version 2.1, so the latest release, which basically the main changes are documented in a change log, but there was just tweaks to some wording and some typo corrections and things like that in some of the compliance criteria. There was a couple of changes to certain requirements being merged and things like that, but basically the version that we're now working from is called 2.1, which was released in August this year. And that is the 1,000-page PDF, which is quite daunting. And definitely not everyone needs to be delving into that, because you can access your standards that you need to meet through the B Impact platform, which if you fill out the self-assessment kind of setup questionnaire, will automatically tailor to your size and sector of company, so that you don't have to like wade through the pages and pages trying to figure out which ones apply to your company. So throughout October and November, B Lab has been releasing lots of really helpful resources. They have released evidence guidance for their all of the different impact topics. So lots of different guidance on exactly what type of documentation you should be uploading. And they've also been releasing training on their Thinkific training platform. And there's now a Thinkific training for almost every single B Corp, B impact topic, and also training on what to expect during the audit process. So I would really highly recommend, they're all completely free as well. So I'd really recommend looking at those Thinkific training courses from B Lab if you want more specific information. So in terms of the resources that we're still waiting for from B Lab, there are still some that are to come in 2026, and they're highlighted in the red boxes on the table there. And specifically, we're really looking forward to seeing the details on the new fee structure. So B Lab UK have frozen their pricing for 2026, and they're going to be absorbing the cost of the new third-party auditing process. However, from 2027 onwards, there will be a new fee structure, which therefore takes into account the additional cost of the third-party assurance element of the review process. So we're hoping to get that information in 2026. Well, we will get that information in 2026 so that we know what those fees are going to look like for companies certifying on the new standards from 2027 onwards. And the other thing that is a really key document to look out for next year is the full details on the new brand guidelines. They're changing the requirements around the use of the B Corp logo, because they have to add basically the B Corp URL so that consumers know where they can go to get more information about the certification when they see it on packaging and things like that. So lots of details, well, the full details will be released in 2026 on the brand guidelines. So we'll now move on to talking about the size definitions. So there has been a recent change in how to determine your size category. And this was at the start of November. So it is a very recent change. And B Lab have changed the rules. So now your size track on the new standards will be determined by your full-time equivalent number of workers or your revenue category in US dollars, whichever one is smaller. So they're calling it the lesser of two rule. Previously, the guidance was that it was the bigger of the two. So they've flipped this guidance and it's now the smaller of these two categories. So if you sit in two different size categories for FTE and US dollars, you're now taking the smallest one. And B Lab have released their official kind of reasoning as to why they've made that change. And it's basically because the new version of this rule the lesser of two rule makes the standards more equitable for both SMEs and also companies in the global south, where employee to revenue ratio was not producing an equitable scoping result, because those companies tend to have more employees compared to the revenue they're generating, and therefore they were being bumped up into the next size category, and they were therefore having to meet new, more stringent, higher level requirements, which they didn't have the capacity to meet, basically. So it's basically an equity reason that they've changed this rule down to now the smaller of the two tracks. So the action for you on this one is, if you haven't done so already, go away and check your new track size to make sure that you're falling into either the same category as you were before, because you're on the same band for both FTE and US dollars, or perhaps you're being bumped down a category. And the good news there is, if you are being bumped down a category, then you are needing to meet less stringent requirements for the first year, for year zero. And then just beware of your growth trajectory as a business, because if you are going to need to move up a category in the coming years, potentially in your continuous improvement journey, then you might need to be, for example, if you're small now, planning towards meeting the medium requirements in the coming years. So just good to kind of keep an eye on that and be planning for that continuous improvement based on your growth trajectory as a business. So we'll now get into the details of nonconformities. So this is a really welcome announcement, because this is really creating the sense that the new assurance process is a safety net and it's not a trap. You don't need to have absolutely perfect compliance and perfect evidence for every single requirement in the new standards. You are allowed to certify with a certain level of nonconformities. And these are categorized by minor and major nonconformities. So with minor nonconformities, these are temporary or isolated, less severe gaps in your performance, and they need to be resolved by your next audit. So if you're a larger company, you'll have a surveillance audit between year 0 and year 3. And if you're a smaller company, for example, you might not have an audit until year 3. So then you'd have varying different number of years to rectify that, depending on your size of your company. And with minor nonconformities, you can still have your certification granted with minor nonconformities. So an example of a minor nonconformity is some employees are found to not be receiving a living wage due to the timing of their hiring. And that was determined to be an oversight, for example, but it's not affecting the majority of employees. So that would be something that you could create a corrective action plan to make sure it's rectified by your next audit, and that would be fine for you to pass certification with that minor nonconformity recorded on your certification. The other category is major nonconformities, and these are bigger, more systematic or high risk issues, and they've said this is a complete failure to meet a requirement. So an example of this would be the company is not found to have any fair wage methodology in place for any of their staff members. So they don't have any plan in place to meet the living wage, for example. So this cannot be taken forward into your certification. Major nonconformities have to be resolved within 6 months. So you do still have a really good amount of time, 6 months, to put a plan in place and rectify this major nonconformity and make sure that it's met whilst you're in the review process. So you'll be remaining in the audit process, remaining in touch with your auditor whilst you're resolving that major nonconformity that might come up. And then once it's resolved, your certification will be granted as normal. So the key thing to mention here is that any nonconformities that are identified during the audit process, you'll agree a corrective action plan with the auditor, and then you have a certain amount of time to rectify those major nonconformities. So it's 6 months for the first audit against year 0 requirements, And then any subsequent audits, whether it's a surveillance audit, a year 3 audit, or a year 5 audit, it will be 3 months in order to rectify those major non-conformities to then proceed with carrying on your certification. So this is really good news because I feel like it really aligns with other standard audit processes, such as ISO 14001 audits, where you have non-conformities identified and you have until your next audit to rectify it. So it feels like a really good balance of having stringent, kind of rigorous audit process, but then also allowing that flexibility where not everything is going to be perfect. You're going to be able to rectify things, resolve things, and still move forward with the certification, which I feel is really positive. And just a final slide from me on another mechanism. So there is now also something called a variance mechanism, which is basically a formal process to get a temporary exemption to a particular standard or a particular requirement. So these will only be granted in quite severe scenarios. So it has to be completely infeasible due to like a legal, a technical, or a security reason, for example. So there's some examples here on the slide, like your local or national laws actually prevent you from being able to meet a certain requirement, or you have a particular national disaster, or a conflict or something like that, which means you can't meet it. So they are quite serious events, which would provide the grounds for a variance mechanism, but it's still worth knowing that this does exist within the tailoring approach that B Lab have come up with. So the process of getting a variance mechanism approved, when would you request this? You request this to B Lab during your self-assessment phase. So whilst you're still filling out the B impact assessment and before you have submitted, and you have to specify which requirements are affected, justify why you should get a variance mechanism granted, and provide evidence of that justification. B Lab then have a decision-making body called the Assessment Decision Committee who will decide whether the variance is approved or the variance is denied. And if the variance is approved, there will be a time frame and conditions as to how long you can have that variance approved and when you'll actually need to meet that standard, for example. Just one final thing on this, on tailoring mechanisms. The variance mechanism is one way that B Lab are allowing kind of accommodations for varying kind of business scenarios and contexts. But there is a distinct mechanism called the equity mechanism, which allows companies operating in countries with more barriers to opt out of a certain percentage of requirements. So just to mention that this is different from the equity mechanism, which applies to certain countries, but not the UK. So if you have operations in other countries, then the equity mechanism could be something for you to look into. I'll hand back to Lucy now, who's going to go through some insights on key projects that we've been identifying that would be really helpful for you to start thinking about whilst you're on your improvement journey.
Thank you, Daisy. So indeed, we've now conducted a number of gap analysis with clients of various sizes, various industries. So we have a good understanding of what the key gaps tend to be, and therefore the key projects in terms of effort and potential financial investment. And what's interesting is that whether it's assessing your human rights, your environmental impacts, getting a full picture of your carbon footprint, or even bringing all of this together and some more into a materiality assessment, most of these projects are essentially about giving your business a clear understanding of how it affects its stakeholders and the world. So now, of course, the aim for this work is to then set strategies and action plans and set yourself targets on which you'll then have like 3 years to work on and demonstrate projects against those. When the year 3 requirements around demonstrating progress against your strategies really come in, which gives you a bit more time to then craft budgets and strategies and start working on those action plans. Another area that's worth flagging is collective action, which applies to all B Corps, although to a different degree of depth depending on your company size. And we're highlighting it here because it does require commitment, but it's also much easier to approach once you have a clear picture of what the material issues to your business are, so that your then collective action is meaningful. And it's also a really important point of B Corp and the new standards. And it shows that the new standards are not only about your own company's own performance, but also about how you contribute to collective progress. Most of the other year zero requirements actually tend to be projects that are either requiring a bit less effort or less investment. Some things are like you might already have in place if you're already a B Corp, like a responsible marketing policy, a D&I strategy, or measuring your workplace culture or employee engagement. And there are some that may feel a bit newer, but that we believe are actually about formalizing good practices that all B Corps should reasonably have in place. So for instance, when you think of formalizing a stakeholder governance policy, well, all B Corps do commit to stakeholder governance in their articles of association, or something like a public grievance procedure, publicly available grievance mechanism feels a bit procedural, but is also something that you should have as part of this stakeholder governance and accountability to all your stakeholders. But looking back at these few like big key projects, what I wanted to also emphasize is the fact that they do not only bring you significantly closer to meeting the B Corp standards, but they all have strategic value in their own right. And therefore, we would really like you to see those as focused investment in resilient and good governance. So first, they actually help you prioritize what actions will have the most impact. So once you've mapped, for instance, your human rights risk or environmental hotspots, your carbon footprint, your material issues, it becomes much clearer to you, like where to invest your focus, your time, your resources, which we know are very limited for most businesses. Second, it also strengthens your resilience and your risk management. So those assessments will shine a light on some vulnerabilities that you might have, be it in your supply chain, in your operations, in your wider value chain. And it puts you in a much better position to anticipate risk, anticipate regulations, reduce your exposure, and essentially make better long-term decisions. And finally, even by virtue of doing those assessments, you get to embed stronger impact governance and accountability within the business, because for these projects, you will need to bring in the people and the team that should be involved in that kind of work, and form the foundation for clarifying who owns what, where you might have gaps, and just improve this overall governance. And then next slide, please. When it still feels like a lot to do, but it's actually something that you have time for. So appreciating big caveat for companies that need to recertify quite early in 2026 due to the EU Empowering Consumer for the Green Transition directive. But otherwise, you do have some time. And I don't know if that speaks to you, but it certainly speaks to me, a quote that I don't know who it is attributed to, but like we tend to overestimate what we can do in a day, sorry, and underestimate what we can do in a year's time. So here, actually also think that all of those requirements that are daunting potentially, if you're looking at your gap analysis and everything you need to fulfill over year 0, year 3, and year 5, you do actually have time. So here is just a very quick visualization, for instance, and thinking, okay, if you're certifying in 26 or 27, so obviously year 0 comes in at 26 or 27, but then year 3 requirements come in at 29 or 2030. So 2029 or 2030, and then year 5 in 2031 or 2032, which gives you some time to like plan, budget accordingly, etc. So I'm mindful of time, and I want to make sure that we still have time for our speakers. So maybe I'll skim through the next slides, but I just wanted to acknowledge quickly just a couple things that we do not know. As much as we know more than we've ever known, there are still a couple of things that we don't know yet, and just wanted to acknowledge those quickly. So in terms of recertification due dates, so companies used to need to submit their certification 6 months before their recertification due date. Now B Lab has informed that Audit process might take somewhere between 2 to 6 months, but we don't have the clarity of when exactly should a company submit for their recertification, which we understand is important to know and key to know, especially if companies, for instance, would like to submit a bit in advance or just basically to be able to better plan through 2026. The second thing is, as Daisy mentioned, is the fee structure. So we know at least what B Lab UK's plan is for 2026. We don't know what it is for 27. We don't have full clarity on what the fee structure looks like in the US or for B Lab Europe or in other parts of the world for other B Lab partners. And so we're hoping that more information comes on that soon. And third thing, just in case you pick that up and to clarify and anticipate any confusion, there will be two platforms. So B Impact is the self-assessment that you know, like previously known as BIA, where you can set up your account, set up your certification, talk through your scoping with B Lab, carry out your own self-assessment against the new standards. But it looks like there will be then a second platform called the the B Lab certification platform, which will be the platform that is used for the certification itself and the audit process itself with the third-party provider. So we don't know exactly what this platform looks like. But all of these things that we don't know yet, follow us and we'll make sure that you are informed and that we communicate about that the second we know more. And basically, next slide, just a couple tips just on how to prepare. Really, really do know your timeline. Actually, still, even recently, we've had conversations with some companies that might be impacted by the EU ECGT. It's really important that you know whether you're impacted or not, because it could have a big incidence on your timeline. So know that. And otherwise, if it doesn't apply to you, go into your BIA if you're already certified B Corp to see which timeline you should submit at. Follow all the channels, deep dive into the requirements, do not procrastinate it, conduct a gap analysis, and involve your team members early so that they can contribute, and be strategic when developing your action plan. And by that, I mean, now that you know and now you understand maybe the non-conformities a little bit better, try to also see when you're not too sure whether a practice is completely perfect and exactly like 100% going to meet the requirement. Is this something that you could potentially resolve relatively quickly if a non-conformity or even if a non-conformity was flagged? Or is this something that would require significant time and investment, and therefore you really need to make sure it's quite robust, because you cannot really have or take the risk that this is flagged during the audit process. Last bit from me before I hand over is it's still a lot of information, and the goal here is that you feel more confident than you were when you joined. So here are a few just reasons to be cheerful. As we said, potentially it's a lot of big projects to do, but they're all best practices. So you're doing this because not just because of B Corp, but because the B Corp standards are not now much better and encouraging companies to do what is best practice. B Lab has set ambitious standards, but they want you to succeed. They're working really hard, as we are as well, in making sure that all companies can transition to the new standards. And for instance, this change in size guidance is an indication that B Lab is willing to also listen and make the standards accessible, etc. Third reason is that, as we said, we have now more clarity than we've ever had. Some mechanisms can be helpful that we've covered today. And there are a lot of resources and more to come, so deep dive into those. And remember, just seeing even the number of attendees today in this webinar, you're not in this alone. The challenges that you have, it's likely that a lot of other B Corps are going through those. So really lean on each other, ask for each other's help. And in case you are still desperate, we are also here to help as Greenheart. We've been deep diving into this into the past months, if not obvious, and we'd be more than happy to have a chat. But that's all for me. I would like now to hand over back to Tom and to a few of our friends who are working really, really hard on their own journey, and so that you can hear a bit more from them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lucy and Daisy. Really, really good insights as always. We're a little bit behind, so I'm going to keep motoring. The point of the next segment was we were very keen that you didn't just take our word for it. We've been having conversations with lots of people who are actually feeling really positive about the new standards. So we've invited some of them on to share their views and stick around for the Q&A afterwards. So get ready, everyone. This is your 2-minute warning. First up, though, Alex, who is head of sustainability at B Corp beauty brand Medicate. I've never known Alex not to sound positive, so she's a brilliant person to hear from. She sadly couldn't join us today live, so I've pre-recorded a short chat with her that we'll show you now. Alex, what are your reasons to be cheerful about certifying on the new standards?
I think the key thing that makes me really cheerful is the fact that we are looking at a unified standard. So we're all going to be measured with the same yardstick, which gives credibility to the standard itself, which gives us a really good way of sort of comparing ourselves with other companies or with people in the movement. So this philosophical way of looking at things makes me really excited. I think the standard is really good and the ask is really high. And then from a corporate company, internal company perspective, I really like that it's really making us push the boat on some things that we might have wanted to do in the past, but maybe we didn't have the bandwidth or we didn't have the capacity. But now, because it is a requirement for certification, it really helped us push the agenda on some of the topics that we were struggling for a really long time.
Great. And I know you've got good support from your SLT, you're well prepared, you've been thinking about this for a long time, so all of that is helping. What one piece of advice would you give to a company that is nervous about certifying or recertifying on the new standards?
I think for many companies, the nervousness comes from the fact that they don't know what they don't know. And there's a big blurb of unknown. And I would say the first thing to do is do your gap analysis, because at least then, even if there are big rocks that you need to deal with, or you need to, dedicate resources and time to address, at least you know exactly what is it that you need to do. And you might be surprised that many of the things that are on the list you're already doing, or you've already done, or they're not as complicated as you thought in the first place. So the knowledge and arming yourself with the exact understanding of what is it that you need to do is probably the thing that is going to take the most of the anxiety out of it. I mean, you might freak out and say like, oh my God, this is a massive problem. But I would say in the majority of cases, knowing what is the problem that you're trying to solve is probably going to be the thing that's going to make you feel the best.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex. Really good luck with the journey.
Yeah.
Alex, what are your reasons? Almost worked flawlessly, but there we go. So thanks, Alex. I'm now pleased to be joined by three other great friends and clients of Greenheart. We have Zach Goodall, who's head of sustainability at long-standing and very high-scoring B Corp Riverford. Louisa is Chief People and Impact Officer at aspiring B Corp and leading agri-food business Noble. And Connor, finally, from the regeneration team at B Corp footwear brand Vivo Barefoot, all of whom are leading the B Corp charge within their businesses. So thank you for joining us. I'm delighted you're here. I'm sorry we don't have longer to chat, but let me go straight to you, Zach. So full disclosure, B Corp, Riverford was Greenheart's first ever B Corp client back in 2017. So I do have a particular soft spot. Zach, how are you feeling at the moment about recertifying on the new standards, and how has your sentiment changed over time?
So just kind of echoing what was just mentioned, especially around raising of the bar, we feel really good about that, even though, as you mentioned, we're a high scoring B Corp, and we initially thought, oh no, they're changing the scoring. How is that going to be reflected? But then when we actually saw the new standard and just how hard it is going to get people to work in a good way, we were really pleased about it, particularly on aspects around environment and circularity, and also honouring stuff around collective action in the government affairs section. It was kind of an emotional roller coaster though, because from the initial looks and some of the gap analysis work we did with yourself and your team, it felt like we had a hell of a lot to do. But then we went back and we looked deeper into it, took stock of what you'd given us, and then more information came out and reevaluation of what exactly is required at year 0, 3, and then 5. That gave us a lot more reassurance about what we're able to achieve. But there's some stuff in there, like Lucy mentioned, where actually it feels like a lot, but you start to break it down and it is just formalization of stuff that you very likely are doing as a B Corp already, or there's not actually that much work further for you to meet that gap. There's a few things where, not going to lie, for us, it is going to be a challenge, particularly as we're in a particularly busy period, new strategy, a lot of people being taken out of their usual roles and seconded onto different things within the business at the moment. That is going to affect how hard it is for us to achieve in the time frame we've got. We've got to recertify, officially start by October 2026. Going through to April 2027. So we've got a lot to do before then. And there's a few things, like particularly on stuff around Jedi, that we know is going to be really challenging due to the people currently in the business that are kind of being put onto other tasks. But these challenges are good. It shows that it is really taking, it is taking a lot for businesses to achieve this. And I think it's gonna be really positive for everyone to be stretched in this way.
Brilliant. Thank you, Zach. Connor, if I can go to you, this is by no means your first rodeo either. What key tools and relationships are making you feel confident about Vivo's recertification journey?
So we're feeling good about recertification. We like the updated standards and the wider range of impact topics. I appreciate the increased clarification guidance on the platform with the sub-requirements to explain them further than it was on the previous standards. There's definitely been some curveballs. I think changing track has been one that I've had to be on top of the last couple of weeks. We changed from a large to a medium track. We're still awaiting this new logo. We don't know the latest date that you could submit to receive that verification back. We will be affected by ECGT, so we wanted to get our recertification confirmed by September next year. But yeah, I am feeling confident. I think we've taken the time to put all of the sub-requirements that affect us into a Monday board. Just gives us a good overview, and like many other medium and large organizations that are B Corps, we've got a network of beekeepers across the ecosystem that are able to be allocated to items which are each sub-requirement on that Monday board. And I can check in to let them know what evidence we'll need to submit to B Lab. And Greenheart, you guys were able to help us to verify that was indeed the evidence that we need to be seeking from our beekeepers across the organization. So that was really helpful. I think when you put all of your sub-requirements on a page, on a Trello on a Monday, you can see what affects you. And say it's about 100 requirements, maybe about 30 of them were either non-applicable or didn't need evidence at all. So you can see what you need to work on as a priority. Internally, the commitment is still the same. There's been questions about draft versions and changing tracks, but we definitely still understand the value of B Corp, and there'll be some hand holding, I guess, over the next few months to make sure that we can submit as soon as possible next year. So we make sure that we receive that verification by September.
We lost your audio, Connor, or is it just me?
I finished my point there, Tom. It's back to you, mate, if that's all right.
Well, hopefully it was just me who missed the last bit, but thank you very much for that. It's great to hear you sounding so positive. Louisa, if I can turn to you, Noble, big business, started its B Corp journey under, let me get the numbering right, 1.6, V1.6, and you're now having to shift to align with the new standards. What's changed for you, and why are you feeling positive about that?
So for us, it's amazing to be in the company today of Riverford and Viva. I feel quite humbled because I know these guys are real experts in B Corp, and we're very much the newbies. And as a 125-year-old business, this has been a labour of love, and we've been using B Corp as our framework for doing good. And it's not been about chasing the badge; it's been about really embedding great practice. So for me, going from the striving for the 80 points and ticking things off the list to now the new standard is music to my ears, because it's really rewarding great embedded proper practice rather than a policy for this or a point for that. So what I found looking at the gap analysis that obviously the lovely Daisy and team have helped us with has been the simplicity and the clarity of our gaps. Whereas before I felt that we had a few hundred things on a list that we're trying to gather evidence for that got you points, but some of those I didn't feel were really adding benefit to the organisation. Where I look at this new standard, it's intrinsic of a great business. There's nothing that I've come across in the new standard that doesn't make great business for good sense.
Brilliant. And I think just following on from that point, but a question to anyone really. We're very aware that we're all approaching this at a time of kind of economic challenge, operational difficulty, and we've all got, you guys particularly, big operational pressures that are real. What have your leadership teams had to say about the prioritization of B Corp and a exercise this large in that context?
Will I go first? Then I'll hand over, because again, we're not recertifying, so I'm lucky I have time on my side. This is a longer term journey for us, but it's always been about how do we eat the elephant. So a couple of really, really big ticket objectives each year to move us closer to it. So this year, really facing into that double materiality assessment. We've had a specific resource on some of the supply chain work. Again, 125-year-old supply chain to unpick and do it slightly different ways is not for the faint-hearted. But we've got specific resource on there. And I think just slowly do it properly, get it embedded. There's no rush for us, which I'm really thankful for. But I feel slightly different probably from Zach and Connor, where you've got a ticking time clock going on.
I've probably got the not as urgent as Connor, but more urgent than Louisa. Yeah, we had like mixed views on achievability. Everyone's still fully behind B Corp's ethos, obviously, and really welcomes raising the bar and everything that's happening. It's just landing at a poor time for us, installing a new ERP system and a bunch of other stuff as well. So everyone's like, okay, we've got to nail down how exactly we're going to do this. But the confidence is there. And fortunately, the people that have been through it over the last two, so like kind of key people, including myself, our head of people and our head of procurement, who are kind of key actors in getting the certification over the line, have all been here for the last two certification cycles for us. So that is a big advantage that we're not kind of patching. It's kind of old hands on it. So everyone's feeling pretty confident.
Yeah, I'd agree with Zach in getting those key people on side in the business to move it over. I think, you can try and spread the responsibility as much as you can in the organization, but a lot does fall on the people team and the sustainability teams. So getting those key people on board and having those as kind of your key bee champions or beekeepers in the organization, and then putting it out to people that want to volunteer and be a part of it. And if there's something that they can do to help out any beekeepers, bee champs, then getting those people involved as well.
Brilliant. And I think you've sort of all touched on it to an extent. My next question was going to be what kind of tools and or relationships are most important to bring you confidence as the people holding this project within the business. I suspect you've touched on it, but is there anything else that any of you would add on that point? Who do we all need to be buttering up, and what tools do we need to be asking for if we don't have them?
For me, I think it comes from the top. I mean, as a leadership team, we're absolutely committed to this. As a privately owned business, our owners massively committed to it. So that sets the tone. But money talks sometimes. So having a budget, having those resources, that makes sure it happens. So I think you need that buy-in from the top, but then the absolute commitment to the resources. And notwithstanding, we're all in very busy times. But just even one or two people can make a huge difference.
Brilliant. We've had a question in from Liz. She describes it as a bit of a strange question for Zach, but reflecting back on your first recertification process, what would you have done differently? Or if you'd had the chance to go back in time, would you have changed something about the way you went about it?
Yes, it may have been going slightly against the wishes of my line manager at the time, but the strategy we used for our first certification was do nothing. It is just to validate. Our original motivation was just to get external validation of what we do around sustainability, social and environmental and governance. But what I would probably do now is, if you're going to carry on being a B Corp after the first certification cycle, is push a bit harder, even if you don't necessarily get everything verified to that higher level and get more points, because then you're just better set up for the next time, to be honest. And I think we probably missed a trick in that on the first round.
Brilliant. Thank you, Zach. We're rapidly getting to the top of the hour. Doesn't time fly when you're having fun? I'm going to ask you each one final question. What one piece of advice would you give to anyone on this call or watching it back who is feeling nervous about the new standards? Zach, while we're with you, hate to put you on the spotlight, but do you want to start?
I think similar to what Connor was saying, to be honest, is really just lay it all out and really try and think how much is there to do, because once I'd taken a look at it 3, 4, 5 times, you start kind of seeing through the mist and you see some stuff that I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn on this. For example, the requirement for large businesses on climate action, you're just having to report. And a lot of that can be spend-based reporting. There's some of these things that seem big, but actually they're very logical. You break them down, they're not gargantuan pieces of work. So yeah, definitely just try and see where, what that gap between actually making it and what you think where you're at already is.
Brilliant. Thank you. One piece of advice, Connor?
Yeah, I think I covered it. Just to get it on a page, work out who your key actors are, what your big jobs are. It's going to take you a bit longer. Try and estimate an amount of hours, and then yeah, just start to tackle it as the key top priorities.
Great. Thank you. And Louisa, any final thoughts?
So I would say have a great partner to help you, and that is not a setup from Tom, just for full disclosure. For us, getting it on a page is one thing, but for us to understand it and how to get it on a page, we couldn't have done without the help of Daisy and the team. So have a great partner that can help you through this, and also extend your network, because like there's all these people on this call today, we're all here to help each other, and that's the spirit of B Corp.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, obviously very grateful for that shout. It wasn't a setup, I confirm. Thank you very much, all of you. That was absolutely brilliant. And thanks for your questions that have been fantastic as well. I'm curious, how are you feeling now, everyone? Has your emoji changed, or are you still feeling bewildered? In which case, we haven't done a good job. Any thoughts? Very welcome in the final moments before we close out. Great, much more manageable, smiley faces, great session. Brilliant. Either all the overwhelmed people have left, or we have achieved something fantastic. So very, very pleased about that. Thank you, everyone. Keep it coming. So we've passed our Q&A. We're at the top of the hour. It just leaves me to say thank you so much to our guests and speakers who have done an epic job, and to all of you for joining us today from wherever you are. I hope you are indeed feeling a little less overwhelmed. We will, of course, follow up with a recording and a short feedback form, but we're here for you. Please get in touch if there's anything you'd like to discuss. Otherwise, have a fantastic day and see you again soon. Thank you very much.